It has been a while since I've done a tier list video, and we have a total of 20 decks to go through. And let's get right into it. So this is a tier list for the current Yu-Gi-Oh meta, plus the rogue decks. So let's get into it. We have 20 lists, or 20 decks, I should say. Now, some of them do run an adventurer package, and others do run a runic package. So let's get right into it, and let's start off. First up, we have Kashtira. I'm going to go Kashtira is high tier 1 with the most representation because it's a brand new deck, and it might be falling off a little, but it will happen. After that, we have Sprite. Sprite is still hanging on there without Elf. Elf ban really did a lot to the deck, but it is still capable of playing with different versions. You have the runic version, you also have a couple other versions like the Live Twin as well, or Pure. And then finally, for the last tier 1 deck, I think is Branded Despia, because this deck has gotten tons better with the new support that came out in Photon Hypernova, Darkwing Blast, and what will be coming out in Cyberstorm Access. This deck will be a prominent threat for quite some time if Konami doesn't deal with it sooner, but we'll have to see on that. Now let's get into the tier 2. Tier 2 is definitely an interesting one, as most people define it as 5 to 10%, and there's not really much that I see being in Tier 2, outside of decks like Labyrinth and along with Sword Soul. Labyrinth is a very good deck because it can easily counter Kashtira if played right. Sword Soul is actually a very good deck setting up for turn 1, but you have to be cautious about Nibiru. But there are new lines or plays they could do that you can get around Nibiru easily. Labyrinth is just a set 5 pass deck, better than Eldritch, and for good reason. After that, let's get to the tier 3 decks. Now, the tier 3 decks are definitely the more interesting ones, as you'll see them most likely, but you'll still see the higher tiers a tad more. First off, we have Mathmech. This deck is a pseudo OTK deck, and also if you just end on a Geo Sigma, it will be a hard time for your opponent to out it unless if they have a Kaiju. But with Mathmech being an OTK deck, it could definitely be used in many other situations like Attic Nisters or even other Cybers decks as well. Next up on the list, we have Nichiria. It could be ran pure, it could be ran with Runics, it could be ran with a few Seiju cards, but it's mostly Nichiria Runic. A very, very potent deck that can end up decking your opponent out pretty fast because of the utility of what the Nichiria cards give. It is easier to get cards into the graveyard with Nichiria Beast, since most people are on spells. You can also summon out Barkion to get rid of some cards, so you have the options to negate some traps, which sometimes can be quite shocking. Now, let's get into the next deck, which is Flundries. Flundries is a deck that people are still playing after the Berry statue ban because this card, the deck, is actually still pretty potent with Empen. Having 3 prosperity, 3 along with map and Advent for Adventure, the deck is still full power without Barrier Statue and could leave other decks in the dust. And afterwards, we have Dragon Link. Dragon Link has had a resurgent recently because Bystials were, or are, an archetype that they utilize. They're going to definitely get more useful support when Cyberstorm Access comes out in Despine and Despeter. So keep an eye out on that, as this deck could come back into tier 1 status later down the line. And finally, for the tier 3 decks, we have Rika Sun Avalon, or you can also run Rika Sun Avalon Therian. This deck has made a resurgence recently because Tearlament is no longer the best deck of the format. And in my opinion, Tear was an obnoxious deck, but before Magnificent Mavens came out, the deck was absolutely fine. Now, outside of that, Rika Sun Avalon is a very scary deck, as it can combo off and probably get through a Nibiru and a couple hand traps here and there. A very skilled pilot could definitely get any of these decks around a few situations. Afterwards, we have Dark World. Dark World is one of the decks that I've been keeping my eyes out on, but it is in the rogue category. Dark World is definitely one of the decks that you got to keep an eye out because there's multiple different versions that's being ran. There's, I believe, an FTK version along with the hand loop version and a pure combo version. So 3 different versions, pretty strong, and also some builds are running a small Tearlament engine. After that, we have Trap Tricks. This is because the new structure deck hype. Trap Tricks is actually a very, very good deck. Very solid, but definitely weaker than Labyrinth. With how Trap Tricks plays, it is definitely a stun deck going first, and once it gets all set up, it becomes an OTK all-out deck. Next up, we have Marincess. Marincess is one of the decks that I definitely wanted to highlight on this. It has a few tops so far this format because of what it does, being able to have built-in negation, built-in protection, and multiple other useful utilities that the deck has. You can go into totally awesome fairly easily. You can do so much with the deck, being able to link climb, and also just build your board of negates that are around cyber monsters and water monsters. After that, we have Plunder Patrols. Plunder Patrols have been using the Adventure engine, and this deck is so annoying to go against because if you hand trap them once, they can still continue. Hand trap them twice, they can still continue. You need like 3 hand traps in my opinion for this deck, but sometimes one will suffice just enough. After that, we have Tearlament. Surprisingly, Tearlaments are still seeing play because you have Kashtira cards that could help tutor out Kashtira Tearlaments, but also we still have 3 Planet and 3 Reno Heart, even though you don't even run Reno Heart anymore. But with all the main pieces at 1 and along with Kid Colo's Band, this deck plummeted from a tier 0 all the way down to Rogue. Next up on the list, we have Punk. Punk, Adventurer, Synchro Pile, whatever you want to call it. This deck has been making waves in small tops here and there, and in my opinion, could definitely see more play as time goes forward. Especially with a lot of this new synchro utility that we're getting, like a Cell Start a Synchron in Maze of Memory. You also have Dispeter and Chaos Angel in Cyberstorm Axis, and Assault Synchron in Battle Legends Monsters Revenge, which honestly is very huge for the deck. With 3 Gizmecs still legal, the deck still do interesting plays if you want to go that route, but you have things like Chaos Ruler that's banned, but you still can run the Zombie Vampire if you need. After that, we have, I guess we could go to Virtual World. Virtual World is one of the decks that I selected from the list that there is. This deck could run the Adventure engine, most likely is, because it is still potent, but the problem with the deck, it still bricks. With how the deck used to play, it used to be VFD Turbo. Now it is Shenshin Barone, Griffin Rider Token Pass, I think? Been a few months since I dueled against Virtual World, but that's the premise of what the deck does. After that, we have one of the best decks that go against Graveyard Directions, being Exorcister. Exorcister is one of the decks that I think you should keep an eye out on. Or if you want some easy wins against a couple of the decks that are higher, it's definitely a deck for you, because most of the decks on this list, like from tier 1 to tier 3, definitely utilize the graveyard, like Sprite, Branded Despia, Tearlaments, Labyrinth, Sword Soul, even Echeria utilizes the graveyard at points. And in my opinion, it's definitely a solid rogue deck next to these two cards. These two decks being Dinosaurs, still OTK heavy, and can easily put out a very strong board even before the new Transcendrakes come out. But this is one deck that you need to keep an eye out. Before we get to Scareclaw, which is definitely in the bottom of the rogue category, I do want to shout out a couple decks being Phantom Knights, Adignister, and Eldritch. Those are three of the decks that would have went onto this list, but I ran out of room and didn't want to go more than 20 decks. Scareclaw is a deck that I personally played and is a really, really powerful deck. You can play it pure, or you can play it the Kashtira version. I had experience with both of the versions, and in my opinion, they both are very scary under the right circumstances. But I want to know what you guys think about this tier list. Been a while. Anyways, I've been Bolt Spider. If you guys like the video, hit that like button down below. But anyways, see you guys in the next video.